I was holding the porcelain cup that was supposed to kill me. My daughter-in-law was smiling, waiting for my heart to stop, so she could inherit my millions. But my housekeeper didn't just spill the tea, she spilled the secret. They thought I was a helpless old woman. They forgot that I am the one who taught them how to hunt. You know, honey, there is a special place in hell reserved for people who bite the hand that feeds them, but there is an even deeper pit for the ones who try to chop that hand off while smiling in your face. I have seen a lot of ugly things in my time. I've seen marriages end over burnt toast, and siblings stop speaking over a chipped vase. But what I am about to tell you is a different kind of ugly. It is the kind of ugly that wears a designer suit and calls you mother. This is the story of Eleanor. She was a woman who thought she had secured her legacy, but she was about to find out that her legacy was trying to bury her. Eleanor was 65 years old, and she did not look a day over 50. She was the CEO of Weaver Textiles, which was a company she started in her garage with a sewing machine and a dream 40 years ago. Now it was an empire worth $50 million. Eleanor was not a soft woman. You do not get to be worth $50 million by being soft. She was fair and she was generous, but she had eyes like a hawk. She could spot a loose thread in a sweater from across the room, and she could spot a lie just as fast. Or at least she thought she could. It was a Tuesday morning in October. The rain was beating against the glass walls of Eleanor's solarium. This was her favorite room in her massive estate. It was filled with orchids and ferns and the smell of damp earth. Eleanor sat in her high-backed velvet chair, reviewing the quarterly earnings on her tablet. She was feeling good. Business was booming. Her health was excellent, aside from a little high blood pressure, which she managed with medication and a strict diet. Her housekeeper, Sophia, entered the room. Sophia had been with Eleanor for 25 years. They were not just employer and employee. They were the kind of friends who did not need to speak to understand each other. Sophia was carrying a silver tray with a pot of hot water and a slice of lemon. But she did not have the tea. Sophia looked nervous. Her hands were shaking just a little bit as she set the tray down. Eleanor noticed immediately. "Are you all right, Sophia?" Eleanor asked, peering over her reading glasses. "You look like you have seen a ghost." "I am fine, Mrs. Eleanor," Sophia said, but her voice was tight. "Just a headache. The weather always gets into my bones." Eleanor nodded, but she made a mental note to give Sophia the afternoon off. She treated her people well. That was why they stayed. The doorbell rang. It was a long, impatient sound. "That must be them," Eleanor said, letting out a sigh. Bradley was Eleanor's only son. He was 40 years old, and he was what we used to call a failure to launch, even though he had launched several times and crashed every single one of them. He had tried to start a record label. He had tried to open a restaurant. He had tried to be a day trader. Every time he failed, Eleanor was there with her checkbook to clean up the mess. She loved him because a mother always loves her child, but she did not respect him. And then there was Jessica, Bradley's wife. Jessica was 32 and beautiful in a sharp-angled way. She used to be a nurse before she married Bradley and decided that her full-time job was spending Eleanor's money. Jessica was always perfectly put together. Her hair was always done. Her nails were always manicured. But her eyes were cold, like a shark looking for a seal. Eleanor stood up as they walked into the solarium. Bradley kissed her on the cheek. His lips felt cold. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Thanks for seeing us." "Hello, Bradley," Eleanor said, pulling away. "Hello, Jessica." Jessica smiled. It was a wide, bright smile, that did not reach her eyes. "Eleanor, darling," Jessica cooed. "You look radiant. That blue silk really brings out your eyes." Eleanor resisted the urge to roll those radiant eyes. Jessica only gave compliments when she wanted something. "Sit down," Eleanor said, gesturing to the wicker sofa. "What is this urgent meeting about? You said it involved the future of the company." Bradley sat down and tugged at his collar. He looked sweaty, despite the cool temperature in the room. "Well, Mom," he started. "Jessica, and I have been doing a lot of thinking. You have been working so hard for so long. 40 years is a long time to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders." Eleanor narrowed her eyes. She knew this speech. She had heard variations of it for the last 5 years. "I am fine, Bradley," she said. "I enjoy my work. It keeps me young." "Of course it does," Jessica interjected smoothly. "But surely you want to enjoy your golden years. Travel, relax, spend time in the garden. We just want to help you. We want to take the burden off your plate." Eleanor looked at them. They looked like two vultures circling a dying animal, waiting for it to stop kicking. "We have a proposal," Bradley said, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of documents. "We think it is time for a formal transition of power. I want to step up, Mom. I want to be CEO. And Jessica would come on as CFO to manage the finances." Eleanor almost laughed. "Jessica managing finance?" The woman who thought a budget was a suggestion. And Bradley running a company he had never spent a single day working in. "I appreciate the offer," Eleanor said, keeping her voice calm. "But I am not ready to retire. And frankly, Bradley, you are not ready to lead. You do not know the business." "We can learn," Jessica said quickly. Her voice had a sharp edge to it now. "We are fast learners, Eleanor, and we think it is time for new blood. The shareholders would love a younger face at the helm." Eleanor felt a flash of irritation. This was not a request, it was a demand. "I think we should discuss this over tea," Jessica said, standing up abruptly. "I brought a special blend. It is Earl Grey imported from London. I know how much you love Earl Grey." Jessica walked over to the side table where the tea service was set up. She opened her large designer tote bag and pulled out a tin canister. Sophia was standing in the corner near the door. She had been silent this whole time, blending into the shadows. But as Jessica pulled out the tea tin, Eleanor saw Sophia stiffen. "I can do that, Mrs. Jessica," Sophia said, stepping forward. "I always prepare Mrs. Eleanor's tea." "No need, Sophia," Jessica said, waving her hand dismissively. "I want to do it. It is a gesture of love. Go check on lunch." Sophia did not move. She watched Jessica's hands closely. Jessica scooped the loose leaf tea into the pot. She poured the hot water. She swirled it around. The smell of bergamot filled the room. It smelled strong, almost too strong. Jessica poured 3 cups. One for Bradley, one for herself, and one for Eleanor. She picked up Eleanor's cup. It was a delicate bone china cup with gold jagged rims. "Here you go, Eleanor," Jessica said, walking toward her with a smile that looked more like a snarl. "Drink up. It will help you relax before we look at the papers." Eleanor reached out her hand. She watched the steam rising from the cup. Suddenly, there was a crash. Sophia had lunged forward. She did not walk. She practically ran. She pretended to trip over the rug. She stumbled right into Jessica. Jessica gasped and dropped the cup. The china shattered on the stone floor. The hot amber liquid splashed all over Eleanor's shoes and the hem of her pants. "You clumsy idiot," Jessica shrieked. Her face turned red. "You ruined the tea." I am so sorry, Sophia cried, dropping to her knees to clean up the shards. I am so clumsy today. Please forgive me, Mrs. Eleanor. Bradley stood up.
Jesus, Sophia.
Watch where you're going. That was hot. Eleanor looked down at Sophia. The housekeeper was on her knees, wiping the floor with a napkin. But she wasn't looking at the mess. She was looking directly at Eleanor. Her eyes were wide with terror. She reached out and squeezed Eleanor's ankle hard. Then she whispered 5 words that made Eleanor's blood run cold. Do not drink the tea. Honey, let me tell you something about instincts. You know that feeling you get when you are walking down a dark street and the hair on the back of your neck stands up? That is your ancestors whispering to you. That is survival. Eleanor felt that whisper turn into a scream when Sophia squeezed her ankle. She looked down at her housekeeper. Sophia's eyes were not just scared, they were pleading. This was a woman who had never broken a plate in 25 years. A woman who loved Eleanor like a sister. And in that split second, Eleanor made a choice. She chose the help over the blood. Eleanor looked up at Jessica. Her daughter-in-law was standing over Sophia, with her hands balled into fists. Her face was twisted into an ugly mask of rage. It was a reaction that was far too big for a spilled cup of tea. Stop it, Jessica, Eleanor said. Her voice was sharp. It cracked through the room like a whip. But she ruined it. Jessica snapped. She ruined the moment. That tea was imported. It was $20 an ounce. It is just tea, Eleanor said, standing up. She was careful not to step in the puddle. She shook her pant leg. Look at this mess. I am soaked. We can make more, Bradley said, stepping forward. He looked desperate. Mom, just go change. Jessica can brew another pot. We really need to get these papers signed today. The lawyers are waiting. Eleanor looked at her son. Really looked at him. She saw the sweat on his upper lip. She saw the way his eyes kept darting to the briefcase. He did not care that she was burned. He did not care that she was upset. He only cared about the signature. I am not signing anything today, Bradley, Eleanor said coldly. What? Bradley asked. But Mom, you said. I said I would listen to your proposal, Eleanor corrected him. I have listened, and now I am tired. This accident has given me a headache. I am going to go upstairs and rest. But Eleanor, Jessica whined. She tried to put her hand on Eleanor's arm. Eleanor flinched. She pulled away as if Jessica were made of fire. Do not touch me, Eleanor said. The venom in her voice surprised even her. The room went silent. Jessica looked shocked. Bradley looked confused. I want you to leave, Eleanor said. Leave the papers on the table. I will review them when I am feeling better. But right now, I want my house empty. Mom, you are being unreasonable. Bradley started to argue. I am being the CEO. Eleanor cut him off. And the CEO is dismissing you. Goodbye, Bradley. Goodbye, Jessica. She stared them down. It was a battle of wills, and Eleanor possessed the stronger will. She had stared down union leaders and hostile board members. Her son stood no chance. Fine, Bradley huffed. He threw the papers onto the coffee table. Come on, Jess. Let's go. She is obviously having one of her episodes. Jessica glared at Sophia, who was still on her knees cleaning the floor. You should fire her, Jessica hissed at Eleanor. She is a liability. The only liability in this room is standing in your shoes, Eleanor thought. But she said nothing. She just pointed to the door. They left. Eleanor listened to their footsteps, echoing down the hall. She heard the heavy front door slam shut. She heard the engine of Bradley's Porsche revving in the driveway. Only then did she exhale. She looked down at Sophia. Sophia had stopped cleaning. She was sitting back on her heels, trembling. Sophia, Eleanor said softly, "Get up." Sophia stood up. She wiped her hands on her apron. She was crying silently. "Tell me," Eleanor said. "Tell me exactly what you saw." "I was in the kitchen, Mrs. Eleanor," Sophia said, her voice shaking. "I was coming to bring the lemon slices, but I stopped when I saw Mrs. Jessica open her bag. She took out the tea tin, yes. But then she took out a little bottle. A little glass bottle with a dropper." Eleanor felt the room spin. She gripped the back of her velvet chair.
Go on.
"She put 3 drops in your cup," Sophia whispered. "Only your cup. Not hers. Not Mr. Bradley's. Just yours." She stirred it in. And then she smiled, Mrs. Eleanor. She smiled like the devil himself. Eleanor looked at the shattered china on the floor. The amber liquid was seeping into the expensive Persian rug. That liquid was meant to be in her stomach right now. 3 drops, Eleanor murmured. She walked over to the mess. She picked up a large shard of the cup. It still had a pool of tea in the curve. "Sophia," Eleanor said. Her voice was no longer the voice of a grandmother. It was the voice of a general going to war. "Yes, Mrs. Eleanor. Go to the kitchen. Get me a sterile jar. A canning jar with a seal. And get me a syringe or a dropper." "What are you going to do?" Sophia asked. "I am going to collect a sample," Eleanor said, staring at the poison on her rug. "And then I'm going to find out exactly what my family thinks I am worth." She looked up at Sophia. "And Sophia." "Yes, ma'am. Do not clean this rug. Roll it up. Put it in the basement. It is evidence now. Eleanor Vance had spent 40 years building a company from nothing. She had fought off competitors. She had survived recessions. She had navigated lawsuits. But she had never faced an enemy like this. She watched Sophia run to the kitchen. Eleanor looked at the stack of papers Bradley had left on the table. The transfer of power. The keys to the kingdom. They did not want to wait for nature to take its course. They wanted to give nature a push. "Well," Eleanor whispered to the empty room, "if they want to fight, they're going to get a war. You know, darlings, the hardest thing in the world is not burying a parent. It is realizing that your child wants to bury you. We mothers are wired to protect our cubs. Even when the cub is 40 years old and balding, we make excuses. We say, 'Oh, he is just stressed. Oh, she is just ambitious.'" But that Tuesday afternoon, Eleanor ran out of excuses. She was driving her vintage Mercedes down the highway in the pouring rain. She did not call her driver. She did not want anyone to see her face. In her designer handbag, wrapped in a silk scarf, was a mayonnaise jar filled with cold tea and death. Eleanor did not go to the hospital. Hospitals ask questions. Hospitals call the police. And if the police got involved, Bradley would lawyer up. He would claim it was an accident. He would claim Sophia was lying. Eleanor knew that justice is a dish best served with receipts. She drove to a nondescript brick building in the industrial district. It was a private toxicology lab run by an old friend named Dr. Eris. He used to test her textiles for chemical safety. Now he tested things that were much more dangerous. She walked in through the back door. Dr. Eris was waiting for her. He was a small man with thick glasses and no patience for small talk. "Eleanor," he said, "you look terrible." "Thank you, Eris," Eleanor said, placing the jar on the metal table. "I need you to run a full spectrum analysis on this. Right now." "Is this tea?" He asked, holding the jar up to the light. It was supposed to be, Eleanor said. But I have a feeling it has a little extra kick. Eris looked at her. He saw the set of her jaw. He saw the fear she was trying to hide behind her eyes. He didn't ask any more questions.
Give me an hour, he said.
Go sit in my office. Don't touch anything. Eleanor sat in the cold office for 60 minutes. She stared at a poster of the periodic table. She thought about Bradley's 4th birthday party. He had cried because he wanted the blue balloon, but he got the red one. Eleanor had driven to 3 different stores to find him a blue balloon. She would have done anything to make him stop crying. Now he was the one making her cry. The door opened. Eris walked in. He was holding a piece of paper. He looked pale. Eleanor stood up. Well? She asked. Eris took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Eleanor, who made this tea. My daughter-in-law. Jessica. She used to be a nurse. That explains it, Eris said grimly. He tapped the paper. This is a cocktail, Eleanor. It is a mix of concentrated foxglove extract and a high dose of potassium chloride. Foxglove, Eleanor whispered. It causes heart failure, Eris explained. But here is the kicker. With the potassium added, it mimics a natural heart attack perfectly. If you had drunk that cup, you would have been dead in 20 minutes. The paramedics would have arrived, found a woman of 65 with high blood pressure, and called it a tragic cardiac event. There would have been no autopsy unless someone specifically looked for it. Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs. It wasn't just a poisoning. It was a perfect murder. How sure are you? Eleanor asked, gripping the edge of the desk. I am 100% sure, Eris said. This wasn't an accident, Eleanor. This wasn't a mistake. This was a lethal dose. If you had taken 3 sips, you would be on a slab right now. Eleanor closed her eyes. She saw Jessica's smile. She saw Bradley looking at his watch. They didn't just want the money. They wanted to erase her. They wanted to turn her 40 years of hard work into an inheritance check before dinner time. Can I keep the report? Eleanor asked, opening her eyes. Eris handed it to her. Eleanor, what are you going to do? Are you going to the police? Eleanor took the paper. She folded it neatly and put it in her purse next to the empty jar. No, Eris, she said. Her voice was ice. The police would just arrest them. They would get a trial. They would get lawyers. They would get to tell their side of the story. Then what? I am going to destroy them, Eleanor said. I am going to make them wish they had just bought me a sweater. She walked out into the rain. She felt different. The mother in her had died in that lab. The CEO was the only one left. And the CEO was about to execute a hostile takeover of her own family. She drove home. The rain was stopping, but the sky was still gray. When she pulled into the driveway, she saw Sophia standing on the porch. Sophia was pacing back and forth, wringing her hands. As soon as Eleanor stepped out of the car, Sophia ran to her. Mrs. Eleanor,
She cried.
you are back. I was so worried. Did you find out? Let's go inside, Eleanor said, taking Sophia's arm. We have work to do. They went into the kitchen. Eleanor sat at the island. She placed the report on the counter. It was poison, Sophia. You were right. You saved my life. Sophia crossed herself and muttered a prayer in Spanish. I knew it, Sophia said. I saw her face, Mrs. Eleanor. But you need to see this. See what? Sophia reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small black object. It looked like a USB drive. What is that? Eleanor asked. Mrs. Eleanor, please do not be mad at me. Sophia said, looking down at her shoes. But 3 months ago, I heard Mr. Bradley talking on the phone. He was yelling about money. He said he needed it fast. And then Mrs. Jessica started coming over when you were at work. She was looking through your office. Eleanor stiffened. So I bought a camera, Sophia whispered.
Ananikam.
I hid it in the solarium, in the potted fern. Eleanor stared at the housekeeper. This woman had been spying on her family. Any other day, Eleanor would have fired her for invading privacy. But today was not any other day. You recorded them? Eleanor asked. Sophia nodded. I recorded everything today. The meeting, the tea, the spill. But I also recorded what happened after you went upstairs. After I went upstairs? Eleanor repeated. Yes, Sophia said, plugging the drive into Eleanor's laptop on the counter. You told them to leave. But they didn't leave right away. They stayed in the solarium for 5 minutes. Sophia clicked a file. A video window popped up. Eleanor leaned in. She watched the screen. The video on the screen was grainy and shot from a low angle because the camera was hidden inside a fern, but the audio was crystal clear. Eleanor watched as her son and daughter-in-law stood in the solarium just moments after she had ordered them to leave. On the screen, Bradley was pacing back and forth, kicking at the rug where the tea had spilled. I cannot believe this, he shouted. His face was red. We were so close. The pen was in her hand, Jessica. She was going to sign. Calm down, Bradley, Jessica said. She was calmly wiping tea splatter off her designer handbag with a tissue. She looked bored. Calm down, Bradley yelled. The bank called me this morning. We are overdrawn. If we do not get access to her accounts by Friday, we are going to lose the house. We are going to lose the cars. Jessica stopped wiping. She looked up at Bradley with eyes that could freeze water. She is old, Bradley, Jessica said. And now she is stressed. Did you see her hands shaking? She didn't drink the tea, Jessica, Bradley groaned. Your little nurse cocktail is soaking into the floorboards. So what? Jessica shrugged. The stress alone might kill her. Did you see how red her face got? Her blood pressure must be through the roof. We just need to keep the pressure on. We come back tomorrow. We apologize. We bring flowers. And then we try again. Try what? Bradley asked. Whatever it takes, Jessica said. I have access to her medicine cabinet, remember. I can swap her blood pressure pills for sugar pills. I can double her dosage. There are a million ways to skin a cat, Bradley. Or in this case, a rich, old, stubborn goat. Bradley laughed. It was a cruel, ugly sound. She really is a goat, isn't she? He said. God, I am so sick of her lectures. I built this company from nothing, Bradley. He mocked Eleanor's voice. Hard work, Bradley. I know, Jessica said, linking her arm through his. Just imagine the funeral, baby. Open casket, everyone crying, and us walking away with $50 million. We can finally buy that island in Greece. Let's go, Bradley said. I need a drink. A real one. The video ended. The screen went black. Eleanor sat there in the kitchen. The silence was heavy. It pressed against her ears. She looked at the laptop. She had just watched her son mock her life's work. She had watched him laugh about her funeral. She had watched him agree to murder her for a vacation home. She felt a tear roll down her cheek. But it was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of finality. It was the last drop of love she had for Bradley leaving her body. Sophia stood next to her, trembling. I am so sorry, Mrs. Eleanor, Sophia whispered. I should have shown you sooner. No, Sophia, Eleanor said, wiping her face with a linen napkin. You showed me exactly when I needed to see it. She stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the wet garden. The rain had stopped, but the world looked different now. It looked sharper. They think I am sick, Eleanor said. They think the stress is killing me. They think they can come back tomorrow and finish the job. She turned to face Sophia. A slow, cold smile spread across Eleanor's face. It was the smile she wore when she acquired a competitor. Sophia, do we still have that theatrical makeup kit from the charity Halloween party last year? Yes, ma'am, Sophia said, confused. It is in the attic. Go get it, Eleanor ordered. And get my pale foundation. And the gray eyeshadow. What are we doing, Mrs. Eleanor? Eleanor walked back to the counter and picked up the toxicology report. They want a dying mother, Eleanor said. They want a tragic cardiac event. They want a show. She ripped the report in half. Then she ripped it again. So I am going to give them the performance of a lifetime. I am not going to call the police, Sophia. Not yet. I am going to let them think they won. I am going to let them think the poison worked or the stress worked. It doesn't matter. She slammed her hand on the marble counter. I am going to lure them into a boardroom. I am going to make them sign their names on a piece of paper, thinking they're getting my empire. And then I am going to play that video on the big screen in front of the entire board of directors. Sophia's eyes went wide. Then she smiled. A fierce, loyal smile. I will get the makeup, Mrs. Eleanor. Good, Eleanor said. And Sophia, bring me the phone. I need to call my lawyer. I need him to draft a very specific document, one that looks like a will, but acts like a trap. Eleanor looked at her reflection in the dark window. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a predator, waiting in the tall grass. Bradley wants an inheritance, she whispered. I am going to give him a prison sentence. You know, darlings, there is a saying that all the world is a stage and all the men and women merely players. Well, let me tell you something. There is no actress in Hollywood better than a mother who has caught her children in a lie. You give Meryl Streep a script, and she'll give you a performance. You give a betrayed mother a motive, and she will give you a masterpiece. Eleanor Vance was not trained at Juilliard. She was trained in the boardroom. But that Wednesday morning, she prepared for the greatest role of her life, the role of the dying victim. It was 7 a.m. The sun was trying to peek through the heavy velvet curtains of the master bedroom. Eleanor sat at her vanity table. Usually this was where she applied her armor. The red lipstick, the sharp eyeliner, the expensive moisturizer that promised to turn back time. Today she was doing the opposite. Sophia stood next to her, holding a palette of theatrical makeup they had dug out of the attic. It smelled like old dust and crayons. Make me look tired, Sophia, Eleanor ordered. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were hard as flint. Sophia dabbed a sponge into a pot of gray cream. She hesitated. Her hand hovered over Eleanor's cheek. Mrs. Eleanor, are you sure about this? Sophia asked. It feels wrong to paint death on a living face. It feels like bad luck. The bad luck is already in this house, Sophia, Eleanor said, closing her eyes. Just do it. Sophia worked in silence. She blended the gray into the hollows of Eleanor's cheeks, making them look gaunt. She took a bruised purple shadow and stippled it under Eleanor's eyes until she looked like she hadn't slept in a week. She took a pale beige foundation and covered Eleanor's natural rosy complexion until she looked like parchment paper. When she was done, Eleanor opened her eyes. She looked in the mirror. She didn't see the powerful CEO. She saw a ghost. She saw a woman whose heart was failing. It was terrifyingly convincing. Perfect, Eleanor whispered. Now for the final touch. She reached for a bottle of glycerin and dabbed a little on her forehead and upper lip. It looked like the cold, clammy sweat of a person in cardiac distress. She put on her nightgown, not the silk one she usually wore, but an old flannel one she kept for sick days. She messed up her silver hair. She got into bed and propped herself up on 3 pillows. Open the curtains just a crack, Sophia, Eleanor said. I want a beam of light right on the bed. I want to look like an angel waiting for the bus. Sophia adjusted the curtains. Now, Eleanor said, go downstairs. Call Bradley. Tell him I am worse. Tell him I am asking for him. Tell him to hurry. Sophia nodded and left the room. Eleanor lay back against the pillows. She practiced her breathing. Shallow, raspy. She thought about the video. She thought about Jessica saying, open casket, everyone crying. She let that anger simmer in her belly, but she kept her face blank. 20 minutes later, she heard the front door open. She heard running footsteps on the stairs. Mom, Bradley's voice called out. It sounded frantic, but Eleanor knew better now. She knew it was the frantic sound of a man worrying about his inheritance, not his mother. They burst into the room. Bradley was first, holding a bouquet of white lilies. Lilies, the flower of funerals. The audacity was almost impressive. Jessica was right behind him, wearing a look of practiced concern. She was dressed in black. She was already dressing for the widow role. Oh my God, Bradley said, stopping at the foot of the bed. He dropped the flowers. Mom, you look. Eleanor turned her head slowly on the pillow. She let her hand tremble as she reached out to him. Bradley, she rasped. Her voice was a dry whisper. I am so glad you came. Mom, what is happening? Bradley asked, rushing to her side. He took her hand. His palms were sweaty. I don't know, Eleanor wheezed. I felt fine yesterday, but after you left, the chest pain, the dizziness. I feel like I am fading, Bradley. Jessica stepped forward. She pushed past Bradley. The nurse mode took over. She put her hand on Eleanor's forehead. She felt the glycerin sweat. She looked at the pale skin and the blue-tinted lips. Eleanor saw a spark in Jessica's eyes. It wasn't fear. It was victory. Jessica looked at Bradley and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. She was thinking the poison worked. She was thinking the stress killed her. You need a doctor, Bradley said, but he didn't move to call one. No, Eleanor said, gripping his hand tighter. No doctors. I hate hospitals, Bradley, you know that.
I just want to be home.
But Mom, listen to me. Eleanor interrupted him, letting a cough rattle in her chest. I did a lot of thinking last night about what you said about the company. The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. You could hear the greed, sucking the air out of the room. You were right, Eleanor whispered. I am too old. I am too weak. I can't do it anymore. Bradley looked at Jessica. His eyes were wide. I want a sign, Eleanor said. I want to give it to you, Bradley, before it is too late. Honey, let me tell you something about greed. Greed is like a blindfold. It covers your eyes and it plugs your ears. If Bradley and Jessica had been paying attention, they might have noticed that Eleanor's hands were shaking a little too rhythmically. They might have noticed that her breathing was shallow, but her pulse, which Jessica checked twice, was strong and steady beneath the skin. But they didn't notice. All they saw was the finish line. All they saw was $50 million lying in a bed, waiting to be collected. When Eleanor whispered that she wanted to sign the papers, Bradley looked like he had just won the lottery. He actually let go of her hand to reach for his jacket pocket. "I have the papers right here, Mom," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "I brought them just in case."
We can do it right now.
"Do you have a pen?" He started patting his pockets frantically, looking for a pen. He looked like a man trying to find his keys in a house fire. Jessica smacked his arm. "Don't be gauche, Bradley," she hissed. She turned to Eleanor with that fake nurse voice. "Eleanor, dear, are you sure you are up to this? We don't want to strain you." "I have to do it," Eleanor wheezed. "I have to secure your future." But she paused and let out a long, rattling cough. It sounded like gravel in a blender. Sophia had taught her well. "But what, Mom?" Bradley asked, leaning in close. "I can't do it here," Eleanor said. "What do you mean you can't do it here?" Bradley's face fell. "Just sign the paper, Mom. It is legal." "No," Eleanor said, shaking her head weakly. "The board. The board of directors. You know how they are, Bradley. They are sharks. If I sign this here in my bedroom while I am sick, they will contest it. They will say I was not in my right mind. They will say you coerced me." She saw the fear flash in Bradley's eyes. He knew she was right. The board hated him. They had watched him fail at business for 20 years. They would sue him into oblivion if they smelled blood in the water. "They will tie this up in court for years," Eleanor whispered. "You won't see a dime until you are 60. Bradley looked at Jessica in panic. "What do we do?" he mouthed. Jessica bit her lip. She was calculating. She looked at Eleanor, who was lying there looking like death warmed over. "We have to take her to the office," Jessica said.
What?
Bradley whispered. "She can barely sit up. If she signs it in the boardroom with witnesses and the corporate seal, they can't touch us," Jessica said. "It becomes an official transfer of power. It is bulletproof." She turned to Eleanor. "Eleanor, can you make it to the office? It is a 20-minute drive." Eleanor closed her eyes, as if summoning the last of her strength. Inside, she was grinning. They were walking right into the trap. "I will try," Eleanor whispered.
Help me up.
It took 10 minutes to get Eleanor out of bed. She made her body dead weight. She made Bradley and Jessica heave and sweat to get her into her wheelchair. She let her head loll to the side. She let a little bit of drool escape the corner of her mouth. It was Oscar-worthy. Sophia hovered in the hallway looking terrified, but Eleanor gave her a secret wink when Bradley wasn't looking. They wheeled her out to Bradley's Porsche. It was a tight squeeze. Eleanor groaned as they buckled her in. "Drive fast," she mumbled. "I don't know how much time I have." Bradley drove like a maniac. He was weaving through traffic, honking at old ladies running red lights. He was racing against the clock, but he didn't realize he was racing toward his own destruction. Jessica sat in the back seat leaning forward. "Hang in there, Eleanor," she said.
Just hold on.
"We are almost there." Eleanor looked out the window. The city blurred by. She saw the skyline she had helped build. She saw the Weaver Textiles Tower rising above the other buildings. It was a monument to her hard work. And these two parasites thought they could steal it with a few drops of poison and a fake tear. They pulled up to the headquarters. Bradley parked in the loading zone. He didn't care about the ticket. He ran around and got the wheelchair out of the trunk. They wheeled her into the lobby. The security guard, a man named Henry who had known Eleanor for 30 years, started to rush over. "Miss Vance," Henry gasped. "Are you all right? Should I call 911? "No," Bradley barked, pushing the wheelchair past him. She is fine. We have a meeting. Call the board. Tell them to meet us in the main conference room immediately. It is an emergency. Henry looked at Eleanor. Eleanor gave a tiny nod. Henry stopped reaching for the phone. He looked confused, but he did as he was told. They got into the elevator. The doors closed. The numbers started to climb. Eleanor leaned her head back against the leather seat of the wheelchair. She looked at the reflection in the polished metal doors. She saw a frail, dying old woman, and behind her, she saw two vultures licking their lips. They stepped out onto the top floor. The boardroom was at the end of the hall. The glass doors were already open. Bradley pushed her down the hallway. He was practically running now. We made it, Mom, he said, breathless. We are here. Just a few signatures, and you can rest. You can rest forever. They rolled her into the massive conference room. The long mahogany table was empty, but the board members were already filing in through the other door, summoned by Henry's urgent call. There were 6 of them, men and women in gray suits. They looked shocked to see their powerful CEO slumped in a wheelchair, looking like she had one foot in the grave. Bradley pushed Eleanor to the head of the table. He didn't even let the board members sit down. He slammed the papers onto the table in front of her. Here, Mom, he said, shoving a pen into her trembling hand. Sign here. And here. Eleanor looked at the paper. The words swam before her eyes, not because she was sick, but because she was disgusted. Irrevocable trust. Transfer of assets. Power of attorney. She held the pen. Her hand shook violently. Jessica leaned over her. Just steady your hand, Eleanor, she whispered. Just sign your name. Do it for Bradley. Eleanor took a deep, rattling breath. She looked at the pen. She looked at the paper. And then she looked up at the giant screen on the far wall of the conference room. Wait, Eleanor said. Her voice was suddenly stronger, less raspy. Wait for what? Bradley snapped. Sign it. I want to watch something first, Eleanor said. She reached into the pocket of her flannel nightgown, but she didn't pull out a tissue. She pulled out a small remote control. What is that? Jessica asked, narrowing her eyes. Eleanor pressed the button. The giant screen flickered to life. The lights in the room dimmed, and suddenly there was Bradley and Jessica, standing in the solarium. Their voices boomed through the high-quality speakers of the boardroom, filling the silence with their poison. Imagine the funeral baby. Open casket. Everyone crying. Eleanor sat up straight in her wheelchair. She wiped the glycerin sweat from her lip. She looked at her son and saw the blood drain from his face until he looked like the ghost he wanted her to be. You know, honey, there is a sound that is louder than a bomb going off, and that is the sound of a pin dropping in a room full of people who have just realized they are witnessing a murder confession. The air in that boardroom didn't just get heavy, it turned into concrete. The video on the giant screen was playing on a loop. Bradley's voice filled the room, mocking his mother's hard work. Jessica's voice echoed off the mahogany walls, talking about skinning a cat. We come back tomorrow. We apologize. We bring flowers. The board members sat there, with their mouths hanging open. These were men and women who had seen hostile takeovers and market crashes. But they had never seen a son plot to kill his mother for a beach house in Greece. Bradley was the first to react. He looked at the screen, then he looked at Eleanor, then he looked at the board. Panic does funny things to a man. It stripped away his expensive suit and left him looking like a scared little boy who broke a vase. Turn it off, Bradley screamed. He lunged across the table, trying to grab the remote from Eleanor. That is fake. That is AI. Turn it off. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't cower. She didn't wheeze. She stood up. She didn't struggle out of the wheelchair. She didn't ask for help. She stood up with the grace and power of a queen rising from her throne. She slapped Bradley's hand away. It was a sharp, loud smack that resonated through the room. Sit down, Bradley, Eleanor commanded. Her voice was not raspy. It was not weak. It was the voice that had commanded this room. For 40 years, Bradley stumbled back. He looked at her as if she had just risen from the dead. Mom, he stammered. You can stand. I can do more than stand, Eleanor said. She reached up and wiped the gray makeup from her cheek with the back of her hand, revealing the flushed, healthy skin underneath. I can see, and I can hear. And right now I am looking at a man who isn't fit to run a lemonade stand, let alone a multi-million-dollar corporation. Jessica let out a strangled noise. She was backing away toward the door, her high heels clicking on the floor. She looked like a trapped rat, looking for a hole. It's a lie, Jessica shrieked, pointing at the screen. That video is doctored. She is crazy. Look at her. She is wearing theatrical makeup. She has dementia. She is hallucinating. Eleanor turned her gaze to Jessica. It was a cold, dissecting look. Dementia, Eleanor repeated. Is that the narrative now, Jessica? First it was heart failure. Now it is dementia. You really need to pick a story and stick to it. Eleanor walked over to the head of the table. She ignored the wheelchair. She stood tall in her flannel nightgown, looking more dignified than anyone in a suit. She looked at the board members. Ladies and gentlemen, Eleanor said calmly, I apologize for the theatrics. But sometimes you have to play dead to see who comes to dig the grave. Mr. Henderson, the chairman of the board, stood up. His face was purple with rage. He glared at Bradley. Is this true? Henderson demanded, pointing at the screen where the video was still playing on mute, showing Jessica checking her nails while discussing murder. Did you poison her?
No.
Bradley yelled.
No.
It was just tea. It was Earl Grey. She is making this up because she hates Jessica. She is jealous. Jealous? Eleanor laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. She reached into the pocket of her nightgown again. She pulled out the plastic bag containing the toxicology report she had taped back together. She threw it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of Henderson. Read it, Eleanor said. Henderson picked it up. He put on his reading glasses. He read the words out loud. Concentrated digitalis and potassium chloride. Lethal dosage. He looked up at Bradley. The look of disgust on his face was enough to wither a plant. You tried to kill her, Henderson whispered. It wasn't me, Bradley shouted, pointing at his wife. It was Jessica. She used to be a nurse. She made the tea. I didn't touch it. I didn't know what was in it. Jessica gasped. She spun around to face her husband. The mask of the loving wife shattered completely. You spineless coward, Jessica screamed. It was your idea. You said you couldn't wait another year. You said she was taking too long to die. I never said that. Bradley yelled back. You said we needed the money for the island. I said we needed the money to pay off your gambling debts, Bradley, Jessica screeched. And there it was, the truth, spilling out onto the boardroom floor like garbage from a torn bag. They turned on each other, faster than wolves fighting over a scrap of meat. Eleanor watched them. She felt a deep, hollow ache in her chest. This was her son, the boy she had rocked to sleep, the boy she had taught to ride a bike. And here he was throwing his wife under the bus to save his own skin while admitting he wanted his mother dead for gambling money. Enough, Eleanor said. She slammed her hand on the table. The sound stopped their screaming instantly. You know, darlings, there is nothing uglier than watching a rat try to chew off its own leg to escape a trap. But watching two rats chew on each other? That is a spectacle. Bradley and Jessica stood on opposite sides of the mahogany table, panting like exhausted dogs. They had just confessed to everything without a single police officer in the room. They had confessed to the poison. They had confessed to the motive. They had confessed because they were scared, and scared people make mistakes. Eleanor stood at the head of the table. She looked down at the documents. Bradley had been so desperate for her to sign. The transfer of power, the keys to her kingdom, gambling debts, Eleanor said softly. Her voice cut through the tension like a razor blade. She looked at Bradley. He was wiping sweat off his forehead with his sleeve. Is that what my life is worth to you, Bradley? She asked. A few bad hands of poker. A few bad bets on the horses. You were going to stop my heart because you couldn't stop spending money. Mom, please, Bradley whimpered. He took a step toward her, reaching out a shaking hand. They were going to break my legs, Mom. I owe people, bad people. I was desperate. I didn't want to hurt you. I just needed the liquid assets. So you decided to liquidate me, Eleanor said. She picked up the pen. The expensive fountain pen Bradley had shoved into her hand earlier. Bradley's eyes lit up with a flicker of pathetic hope. Mom, he breathed. Are you going to help me? Eleanor looked at the pen. Then she looked at the irrevocable trust document. I am going to help you, Bradley, she said. I am going to help you learn the one lesson I failed to teach you as a child. She uncapped the pen. I am going to teach you about consequences. She didn't sign her name. Instead, she drew a thick black X across the entire front page of the document. She pressed down so hard the nib of the pen snapped, spilling black ink across the paper like blood. She threw the broken pen onto the table. This meeting is adjourned, Eleanor declared. Jessica suddenly made a move. She grabbed her purse and turned toward the door. I am leaving, she announced, her voice shrill. I am not staying here to be insulted by a crazy old woman. You have no proof, Eleanor. That video is inadmissible. That report is just a piece of paper. I am going home. She marched to the glass doors. She reached for the handle, but the doors didn't open. Standing on the other side, blocked by the glass, were two uniformed police officers. And standing right behind them, looking very pleased with herself, was Sophia. Jessica froze. She took a step back. What is this? She gasped. I believe that is your ride, Jessica, Eleanor said calmly. Henry, the security guard, swiped his badge. The glass doors slid open with a soft hiss. The officers stepped into the room. The air smelled instantly of authority and leather. Mrs. Vance, one of the officers said, nodding to Eleanor. We received a call about an attempted homicide. Eleanor pointed a steady finger at her son and daughter-in-law. They're their officers, she said. They brought the weapon. They admitted to the motive. And we have it all recorded in 4K resolution on the conference room server. Bradley fell into a chair. He put his head in his hands and started to sob. It wasn't a cry of remorse. It was the cry of a man who realized he would never wear Italian silk again. Jessica tried to charm the officers. She smoothed her hair. She put on her best smile. Officers, really? She laughed, a high, nervous sound. This is all a misunderstanding. My mother-in-law is having a mental break. We were just Ma'am, save it for the station, the officer said, pulling out his handcuffs. He walked up to Jessica. He spun her around. Turn around, hands behind your back. Eleanor watched as the cold metal clicked around Jessica's wrists. She watched as Bradley surrendered without a fight, holding his hands out like a child waiting to be picked up. As they led them out of the room, Bradley stopped. He looked back at Eleanor. His eyes were red and wet. Mom, he whispered. Who is going to run the company? Who is going to take care of you? Eleanor looked at him. She looked at the man who had been her whole world for 40 years. And she felt nothing. The cord was cut. I am going to take care of me, Bradley, she said. Just like I always have. The officers marched them out. The elevator doors dinged. And then they were gone. The boardroom was silent again. The board members were staring at Eleanor with a mix of awe and terror. They realized that the frail old woman in the wheelchair had just orchestrated the most ruthless takedown in the company's history. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. Eleanor, he said, his voice full of respect. What do we do now? The succession plan, it is gone. Eleanor looked down at her flannel nightgown. She looked at the gray makeup smudged on her cheek. She felt tired, deeply tired. But she also felt lighter than she had in years. We draft a new plan, Eleanor said. She turned to the door where Sophia was standing. Sophia looked small in the doorway, holding Eleanor's purse. Sophia, Eleanor said. Come here. Sophia walked into the room. She looked nervous, surrounded by all the suits. Ladies and gentlemen, Eleanor said, addressing the board. You all know Sophia. She has been serving you coffee for 20 years. But what you don't know is that she has more integrity in her little finger than my son had in his whole body. Eleanor walked over to Sophia. She put an arm around her housekeeper's shoulders. I am going to make some changes, Eleanor announced. Big changes. And I want a legal team here within the hour. What kind of changes, Eleanor? Henderson asked. Eleanor smiled. It was the first real smile. She had smiled all day. I am rewriting my will, she said. And I am setting up a new trust, one that rewards loyalty, not biology. She looked at Sophia. Ready for a promotion, Sophia? Sophia's eyes filled with tears. I just want to make you tea, Mrs. Eleanor, she whispered. Safe tea. Eleanor laughed. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't look scary. It looked just fine. But she wasn't done yet. There was one final twist of the knife, left for Bradley and Jessica. One final message she needed to send to the jail cell they were heading to. You know, darlings, there's a saying that blood is thicker than water, but I have found that mud is thicker than blood. Mud is what you get when you mix dirt and tears, and that is exactly what Bradley and Jessica were left with. It had been 1 month since the boardroom showdown. 1 month since the police dragged my son and his wife out of my building in handcuffs. You might think I spent that month crying in my pillow, but you would be wrong. I spent that month cleaning house. I sat in my lawyer's office on a Tuesday morning. It was raining again, just like that day in the solarium, but this time I was not wearing a flannel nightgown. I was wearing a crimson Chanel suit and pearls. I looked like a woman who had just won a war because I had. Mr. Sterling, my estate attorney, pushed a heavy document across the desk. Are you sure about this, Eleanor? He asked. It is highly unorthodox. You are effectively disinheriting your only child. I am not disinheriting him, Eleanor said, picking up her pen. I am liberating him. He always complained that my money was a burden. He said he felt trapped in my shadow. Well, now he is free to make his own way in the world, assuming he ever gets out of prison. She signed the document with a flourish. This new will stated clearly that upon Eleanor's death, the majority of her estate would go into a charitable trust for victims of elder abuse. But the kicker was the property clause. The massive estate, the solarium, the gardens, all of it was left to Sophia. Sophia was sitting in the corner of the office, squeezing a handkerchief. When Eleanor told her the news, Sophia had tried to refuse. She said it was too much. She said she was just a housekeeper. Eleanor had taken her hands and said, "Sophia, you are the only person in that house who ever treated it like a home instead of an ATM machine. It is yours." Now Eleanor looked at Mr. Sterling. "And the other matter?" she asked. "The debts." Mr. Sterling nodded. "We have liquidated Bradley's assets. The Porsche, the condo downtown, the boat he never used. It barely covers the gambling debts he owed to those loan sharks, but it is enough to keep them from coming after the company. He is bankrupt, Eleanor. Completely and totally destitute." "Good," Eleanor said. She stood up and smoothed her skirt. "I have one last stop to make," she said. "Where are you going?" Sterling asked. "I am going to visit the happy couple," Eleanor said, checking her reflection in the mirror. "I have a housewarming gift for their new cell." The drive to the county detention center was long and bleak. It was a gray concrete building surrounded by razor wire. It was a far cry from the country club where Bradley usually spent his afternoons. Eleanor walked through the security checkpoints with her head held high. The guards looked at her with respect. They knew who she was. The news had been all over the papers. Textile tycoon targets toxic tea. The headlines were sensational. She was led to a private visitation room. She had requested to see Bradley first. He was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit. He looked terrible. His hair was greasy. He had lost weight. He looked like a man who had been stripped of every illusion he ever had. When he saw Eleanor, his eyes lit up. He sat down and grabbed the phone on the wall. Eleanor picked up her side. "Mom," Bradley breathed. "Thank God you came. You have to get me out of here. The lawyer says they're going to charge me with attempted murder. They're talking about 20 years, Mom." Eleanor looked at him through the thick glass. She didn't feel anger anymore. She just felt a cold, distant pity. "Hello, Bradley," she said. "Mom, please," Bradley begged. "If you drop the charges, if you tell them it was a misunderstanding, I can go to rehab. I can get help. I promise I will change." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "You had 40 years to change Bradley," she said. "You had the best schools, the best tutors, the best opportunities, and you used them to learn how to poison your mother." "It was Jessica," Bradley whined. "She made me do it." Eleanor sighed. Even now, he couldn't take responsibility. "I am not here to bail you out, Bradley," Eleanor said. "I am here to give you your inheritance." Bradley froze. "My inheritance?" he asked. Eleanor reached into her purse. She pulled out a single piece of paper. She pressed it against the glass. Bradley squinted to read it. It was an invoice. Bradley squinted at the paper pressed against the thick glass. His eyes moved back and forth, scanning the lines. It was an invoice from an antique dealer. Item 1, vintage bone china teacup, gold-rimmed. Cost $150. Below that, Eleanor had written, in her sharp, elegant cursive, "Payment method deducted from inheritance. Remaining inheritance balance, $0. Bradley looked up. His face was pale. "Is this a joke, Mom?" he whispered. "You broke my cup, Bradley," Eleanor said, her voice calm and even. "And you broke my heart." The cup was worth $150. My heart was priceless. But you managed to bankrupt both. She put the paper back in her purse. I wanted you to know that I am not angry anymore, Eleanor said. I am just disappointed. And I am finished. I have sold your condo. I have sold your car. The proceeds went to pay off those loan sharks you were so afraid of. You are entering prison with a clean slate, Bradley. You owe nothing to anyone. She stood up. And no one owes anything to you. Mom, wait. Bradley stood up. He slammed his hand against the glass. Don't leave me here. Jessica tricked me. I am your son. Eleanor looked at him one last time. She looked for the little boy who used to bring her dandelions. He was gone, consumed by the greed of the man standing before her. My son died in the solarium, Eleanor said softly. You are just a stranger wearing his face. She hung up the phone. She didn't look back as she walked out. She heard him screaming her name, muttering muffled thuds against the glass, but she didn't turn around. She walked down the hallway to the next visitation room. Jessica was waiting. When Jessica saw Eleanor, she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She glared. She sat there with her arms crossed, looking like a snake that was annoyed it had been caught. Eleanor didn't even sit down. She just stood in the doorway. I just wanted to tell you one thing, Jessica, Eleanor said. Jessica sneered. What? That you won? That you are the big smart CEO? Go to hell, Eleanor. Eleanor smiled. It was a genuine smile. I wanted to tell you that you were a terrible nurse. Jessica blinked. You used foxglove and potassium, Eleanor said. Classic textbook. But you forgot that I take beta blockers for my blood pressure. It would have counteracted the first dose of the foxglove. You wouldn't have killed me, Jessica. You would have just given me a very bad stomach ache. Jessica's mouth fell open. The realization hit her. She had thrown her life away for a murder plan that was flawed from the start. You are incompetent, Eleanor said, in medicine and in murder. Eleanor turned and walked away, leaving Jessica staring at the wall, realizing her own stupidity was her true judge. 6 months later, the sun was shining on the terrace of the Vance estate. The garden was in full bloom. The roses were vibrant red, and the ferns, the ones that had hidden the camera, were lush and green. Eleanor sat at the patio table. She was wearing a sun hat and reading a book. She looked younger. The stress of carrying a dead-weight son was gone. The glass door opened. Sophia walked out. She was not wearing a maid's uniform. She was wearing a nice floral dress and sandals. Here you go, Eleanor, Sophia said, setting a tray down on the table. It was a pot of Earl Grey tea. Eleanor looked at the tea. Then she looked at Sophia. Did you make it yourself? Eleanor teased. I did. Sophia laughed, pouring 2 cups. And I promise I didn't add any special spices. They sat together, sipping the tea. It was hot and fragrant and tasted like freedom. So, Sophia said, Mr. Henderson called. He says the profits are up 10% since you took over full control again. Eleanor nodded. It is amazing what you can get done when you aren't looking over your shoulder. But I told him I am taking a vacation next month. Oh, really? Sophia asked. Where to? Greece, Eleanor said, winking. I heard there is a nice little island for sale. I think we should go buy it. For the trust, of course. Sophia smiled, a big, radiant smile. I will pack our bags. Eleanor looked out over her garden. She thought about Bradley sitting in a cell. She thought about Jessica stewing in her own venom. And then she looked at Sophia, the woman who had saved her life not for money, but for love. She took a sip of tea. It was perfect. You know, darling's life is funny. Sometimes you have to lose your family to find your family. I lost a son, but I gained a sister. And let me tell you, the tea tastes a lot sweeter when you're drinking it with someone you trust.